Welcome to your storytelling. Enjoy the stories, and don't forget to subscribe. I never saw it coming. The moment I realized my perfect marriage was built on lies. We had a house, a life, a future. But something shifted, something subtle at first. It was like a flicker in the corner of my eye, unseen but there. I brushed it off, but the unease gnawed at me. I loved him. I trusted him. But then, I started to notice the little things. Late nights, secretive phone calls, strange moods. I didn't want to believe it, but deep down, I feared the truth. It started with small signs. His phone buzzing constantly, but when I asked, he'd lie. He'd say it was work, that he had a lot on his plate. But why wouldn't he show me? We shared everything. Our thoughts, our hopes, our days. Yet his phone became a secret, a boundary I wasn't allowed to cross. I asked him directly once, but he shrugged it off. "It's nothing," he said. His smile stretched thin. But in my gut, something was telling me that nothing wasn't so innocent. I thought he was busy with work, but then I found the receipts for calls to her, his ex. I stared at the bill for what felt like hours. Long, late-night calls. Frequent, too. I tried to convince myself it was just coincidence, but how many coincidences could there be? He told me their relationship was over, that they were just friends now, but I saw the evidence. My heart raced as I tried to process it. The woman he once loved was still part of our lives. Only now, she wasn't just in his past. I tried to ignore it. Maybe I was paranoid. Maybe I was just being insecure. But something about it felt off, deeply off. It wasn't just the calls. It was the way he would smile when he mentioned her name, like there was a secret I wasn't allowed to share in. I tried to dismiss it, but it was getting harder. I wanted to believe him, wanted to trust him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something. And I was afraid, terrified, that I was starting to lose him. Then one night, his ex called during dinner. He didn't even hesitate. He answered right away. I froze. I couldn't look at him. Not when the very woman he'd promised to be done with was on the other end. His voice softened as he spoke to her. They talked like old friends. No awkwardness, no hesitation. Like nothing had ever changed. But everything had changed. I looked at him, trying to gauge his reaction, but all I saw was someone who wasn't mine anymore. Not entirely. My heart pounded. They talked like old friends. Too comfortable, too familiar. It hurt. Every laugh, every shared memory, felt like a knife twisting deeper inside me. I couldn't sit still. I couldn't just watch him speak to her as if I wasn't even in the room. "Do you have to take the call?" I asked quietly, my voice barely audible, but he just smiled and shrugged. "It's no big deal." But to me, it was. It was everything. He wasn't just my husband anymore. He was someone else's. The worst part? He didn't even try to hide it from me. I was left with nothing but doubt. The man I thought I knew, my husband, the one who promised to always be truthful, wasn't the person standing in front of me anymore. He was a stranger, a man with secrets. I wanted to confront him, to demand the truth. But what if I was wrong? What if I was just being crazy? I hated myself for even doubting him, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I started to dig. I found bank transfers, hundreds, thousands, payments to her account. I couldn't breathe. I didn't know what to do with this information. Why hadn't he told me? Why hadn't he been honest? Was it for the kids? Was it guilt? Or was it something more? I confronted him, asking about the transfers. He tried to laugh it off, but I could see the unease in his eyes. "It's nothing, just helping her out," he said. But his words didn't match the fear I saw in his face. He told me it was nothing, but those payments? They didn't feel like nothing. They felt like a lifeline he was throwing her way, and I was watching him drown in it. How could he justify giving her money? How could he lie to me so effortlessly? I felt betrayed. I had built my life around trust, around the belief that we shared everything. But now, I felt like a fool, like I was the last to know everything that had been going on behind my back. I confronted him. His face paled. He swore there was an explanation, but his eyes told a different story. "I'm just trying to be there for her," he said. She needed my help. My heart sank. It wasn't just financial help. It was emotional too. I could hear it in his voice, the softness when he spoke of her. The way his tone would shift, almost unconsciously. I knew then. There was more to their relationship than just old memories. He was still in love with her. He promised me it was just help. But my gut said there was something more. And I was right. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just a man trying to be a good ex-husband. No, this was a man who was still deeply tied to his past. I had never felt so small in my life. I wasn't just his wife anymore. I was an obstacle, someone who didn't belong in the picture he was painting with her. He wasn't just helping her. He was keeping her alive in his world. Late one night, I overheard him on the phone. I couldn't catch all the words, but I heard love. My blood ran cold. "I love you," I heard him say, and I felt my heart break right then. I wanted to storm into the room, to scream at him, to demand answers. But I stayed frozen in place. I couldn't breathe. I thought I was going to be sick. How could he do this to me? How could he say those words to her, knowing I was right there? What had happened to the man I married? His voice softened. His ex, they were talking like a couple, like nothing had ever changed. I could hear the intimacy in their words, the shared understanding, the connection that had never really left. I wanted to burst into the room and scream, but I couldn't. I was too stunned, too broken. "This isn't just a friendship," I whispered to myself. No, this was something far deeper, something I wasn't a part of. I wasn't just his wife. I was the other woman in his own home. I couldn't breathe. My mind raced. Was I living with a stranger? Or a liar? I needed to understand. I needed the truth. Every part of me screamed to confront him, to demand answers. But I was afraid of what I might hear, what I might lose. The man I married, the person I trusted more than anyone, was slipping away. And I wasn't sure I could stop it. But I had to try. I had to confront him. Before it was too late, I started watching them. His gestures, the way he looked at her photos, the sneaky smiles. It wasn't just the phone calls anymore. It was everything. The way he spoke about her. The way his face lit up when he mentioned her name. I couldn't deny it anymore. They weren't just friends. They were lovers, bound by a history that I couldn't compete with. I felt like I was fading into the background, like I didn't even exist in the world he was creating with her. The truth was slipping away from me like sand. He was slipping away, and I couldn't stop it. Every day, I watched him drift further, like a ship sailing toward a storm I couldn't avoid. I wanted to reach out, to pull him back, but I was afraid of what I might find if I did. His detachment grew more obvious. The affection he once had for me was replaced by something distant, cold. It hurt more than I could bear. The more I fought to save our marriage, the further away he seemed to be. Then came the text. A simple message from his ex. "I miss you. When can we meet?" It was so casual, so effortless. My eyes blurred as I stared at it, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. He tried to brush it off, claiming it was nothing, but the truth was undeniable. Their relationship wasn't just rekindling. It was alive and thriving. I wanted to scream. I wanted to confront him right then and there, but I held back, too terrified of what would happen if I did. My whole world was crumbling. That text felt like a knife to my heart. I stared at it for hours, but what could I do? The damage had been done. There was no going back from this. He had already chosen her. Every word, every whisper between them was a reminder that I was nothing but an afterthought in his life. The life we built together was a fragile facade. I wasn't even mad anymore. Just sad. So incredibly sad that the man I loved had already moved on, and I hadn't even known it until now. He swore they were just old friends. But deep inside, I knew the truth was far worse. I saw it in the way he looked at her photos, the way his voice softened whenever she came up in conversation. He wasn't just helping her. He was keeping her close. He was keeping that part of his life alive, like an open wound that never healed. I wasn't part of his future. I was a placeholder until he could have her back. The thought made me sick, but I knew it was true. It always had been. He'd been helping her emotionally. He was her emotional support. But he never gave me that. I was just the woman in the background, taking care of the house, keeping things together. But when it came to his ex, he was there, listening, supporting, loving. It wasn't fair. I wanted that. I needed that. But he had nothing left for me. He was too busy rebuilding something with her, something I couldn't even understand. And I was left to pick up the pieces of a marriage that had already ended. Each word he said felt like a betrayal. How could he choose her over me, over us? I had stood by him, supported him through everything. And this was how he repaid me? I was angry, so angry. But beneath the rage was a deep, gnawing sadness. I wasn't enough. I never had been. Not for him. Not for the man I loved. I wanted to leave, to escape, but I couldn't. I was trapped in a marriage that was already dead, trying to hold on to something that was never truly mine. I started to ask myself, was our marriage just a cover for what he was really feeling? Was it always like this? Was I always the one left behind while he chased a ghost from his past? I didn't know what to believe anymore. My whole life had been a lie, and I didn't know how to face the truth. The truth that I wasn't the love of his life. I was just someone to fill the gap, to be there until she came back. And when she did, there was no room left for me. I began to look back. Every argument, every missed connection. Was this always the case? Was I blind to the signs? Or was I just too afraid to see what was right in front of me? Our entire relationship felt like a lie now. All those promises he made, all those sweet words, felt like a performance. I had given him everything, but he had already given his heart away. I wasn't sure where I fit anymore, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to anymore. Then, the phone call came, the one I was dreading. He didn't even try to hide it anymore. He didn't even bother to keep it quiet. I listened, heart pounding, as he told her how much he missed her, how much he loved her. The words cut deep, deeper than I ever imagined possible. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stop him from saying it, to make him take it all back. But I knew it was useless. It was too late. He had already made his choice. And I wasn't it. They planned to meet. He didn't care if I knew. I was nothing more than a convenience now. The thought of it, of them meeting again, of them reigniting whatever they had, made me sick. He had chosen her, and I was just a bystander. I had to leave. I had to get out of this toxic situation before it completely consumed me. But even as I packed my bags, I wondered if he'd even care. Would he even notice I was gone? Or would he just continue on with her, with the life I couldn't be a part of anymore? I had to confront him. I had to know. But he was always so good at turning the tables. He had an answer for everything, a justification for every lie. But when I asked him directly about their relationship, about what was really going on, he hesitated. And in that hesitation, I saw the truth. He didn't love me anymore. He never had. I had been living in a lie, and now it was unraveling before my eyes. I was left with nothing but a broken heart and shattered trust. He said it was for the sake of their kids, that he was just trying to be a good father. But I wasn't stupid. I could see the way he looked at her, the way he touched her when they were together. This wasn't about kids. This was about him still being in love with her. I wasn't part of his life anymore. I was just someone who took care of things while he lived in the past. And that was the hardest part to swallow. He didn't want me anymore. But I saw it. There was more between them than just co-parenting. So much more. They didn't just talk about the kids. They talked about their lives, about the future, about what could have been. It wasn't just financial support. It was emotional. He was giving her everything I'd ever wanted. And all I could do was watch from the sidelines, helpless and broken. I was a fool for ever thinking we had something real. I was a fool for thinking he was mine. The more I saw them together, the more I realized how deeply they were entangled. They shared memories I wasn't part of. They spoke in a language I couldn't understand, a language that only they knew. It was like they had a world of their own, and I was just a spectator, watching from the outside. It hurt. Every touch, every shared laugh felt like a betrayal. How long had he been hiding this from me? How long had he been living two lives? I was no longer the woman he chose. I was just a part of his past. I began to ask myself if I ever really knew him. Was this the man I married? The one who swore he'd never hurt me? Or was I just living with a stranger all along? Every time he spoke of her, his voice softened. Every time her name came up, his eyes glimmered with something I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't just friendship. It wasn't just helping her out. It was love. And he had been lying to me, making me believe that our life was real when it had already been replaced. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't just stand by and watch him slip away, to watch them rebuild what they once had while I was left in the dust. I confronted him, demanding the truth. He tried to brush it off, tried to tell me it was nothing, but I could see the guilt in his eyes, the hesitation in his words. "She's just someone I'm trying to help," he said. But I could hear it, the longing in his voice, the yearning he couldn't hide. I was losing him, and he knew it. I left that night. I packed my things and walked out of the house we had built together. I couldn't live in the lie anymore. I couldn't stand to watch him choose her over me, day after day, as if I meant nothing. It wasn't just his betrayal that hurt. It was the fact that he didn't care enough to fight for me. I wasn't worth the effort. I was the last piece of the puzzle he'd discarded, replaced by the woman who would always hold a piece of his heart. I rented a small apartment, alone, and for the first time in years, I let myself feel the pain, the heartbreak. I had been so focused on keeping it together, on holding everything in place, that I hadn't allowed myself to grieve. But now, in this empty space, I couldn't stop the tears from falling. I had lost everything. My husband, my home, my future. And all I could do was sit there, wondering how I had ever been so blind to the truth. Days turned into weeks. I tried to move on, tried to find a new rhythm, but it felt impossible. Everywhere I looked, I saw reminders of him, of us, of what could have been. And then, there were the moments of silence, the empty phone, the missed calls. He hadn't reached out. He hadn't apologized. He hadn't even cared enough to check in. I was a ghost in his life now, nothing more than a faded memory. And in that silence, I realized how much I had meant to him, how little. Then, one day, he showed up at my door. I didn't want to see him, didn't want to hear his excuses or his apologies. But there he was, standing in front of me, looking like he hadn't aged a day since I last saw him. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him everything I had been holding in, but I didn't. Instead, I opened the door, knowing that this conversation would be the end of everything I had known. He apologized. He told me how sorry he was for everything, for the lies, for the betrayal, for the way he had treated me. But his apology felt hollow. It felt like it was too little, too late. I wanted to forgive him. I wanted to believe that he was truly sorry, that he regretted everything. But deep down, I knew that I couldn't go back. Not after everything that had happened. Not after I had watched him choose her, time and time again. The man I loved was gone. He begged me to come back, to give him another chance. But how could I? How could I trust him again when the truth had been staring me in the face for so long? I had given him everything, my heart, my trust, my love, and he had shattered it all. There was no going back, no repairing what had been broken. He wasn't the man I had married anymore. He wasn't the man I thought he was. And in that moment, I realized that I had to let him go. It was hard. Leaving him was the hardest thing I had ever done, but it was necessary. I couldn't keep living in the shadows of his past. I couldn't keep hoping for something that was never going to happen. He had made his choice, and it wasn't me. It was her. Always her. And as much as it hurt, I knew that I had to start over, to find myself again, to find a life where I was the priority, not the second choice. It was time for me to move on. I didn't expect it to be easy, and it wasn't. The loneliness was overwhelming at times. The nights felt longer, the days colder. But I kept telling myself that this was the right thing to do. I had to rebuild. I had to find strength in myself, not in him. I had to reclaim my life, even if it meant walking away from everything I had known. There were days when I wanted to call him, when I wanted to ask if he missed me, but I didn't. I couldn't. I had to keep moving forward. I found myself again. Slowly, painfully, but I found myself. I surrounded myself with people who truly cared, people who saw me for who I was, not for the woman they thought I should be. I started to smile again, to laugh, to enjoy life. But even as I found happiness, there was always that lingering thought, could I have done more? Could I have fought harder for him? But deep down, I knew the answer. No, he wasn't worth fighting for. Not anymore. Months passed. I had let go of the hope that he would come back, that he would realize his mistake. But one day he did. He called, his voice shaky, asking if we could talk. I knew it was a bad idea. I knew I shouldn't even consider it. But I did. And when I saw him again, I could tell he hadn't changed. He was still the man who had betrayed me. He was still the man who had chosen her. And I knew, deep inside, that I had made the right choice by walking away. I listened to him talk, listened to his apologies, to his regrets. But they meant nothing to me anymore. They were just words, empty words from a man who had lost my trust. "I'm sorry," he said. But those words didn't bring back the years we had spent together. They didn't fix the damage he had done. And in that moment, I realized I didn't need him. I didn't need the lies, the betrayal, or the broken promises. I needed myself, and I was finally free. After he left that day, something inside me shifted. It was like I had been holding my breath for so long, and I could finally exhale. He wasn't the man I thought he was. He wasn't the person I had built my life around. I had been living for him, and now I had to learn to live for me. I started doing things for myself, things I had forgotten about, passions I had neglected. I took long walks, read books that I had set aside, and even started painting again. I was rediscovering who I was meant to be. Still, there were moments when the memories would hit me like a tidal wave. The smell of his cologne, the sound of his laugh. It would all come rushing back, and I'd find myself paralyzed by the grief of it all. I wanted to erase those memories, but they were a part of me now. They were woven into the fabric of my life. And while they still stung, I learned to accept them. The past was gone, but it had shaped me. And now, I had to shape my own future. I met someone new. He was kind, funny, and completely different from my ex. I didn't expect it to happen so soon, and at first, I was hesitant. How could I open up to someone again after everything? But he made it easy. He listened to me without judgment, accepted my scars, and didn't try to fix me. He just wanted to be there, to be part of my life. It wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about learning to trust again, and I found myself trusting him. Slowly, carefully, but surely. As I spent more time with him, I started to realize something important. I wasn't broken. I wasn't damaged goods. I had been through hell, but I had survived. I was stronger than I had ever been, and I didn't need anyone to complete me. I was complete on my own. I had learned to stand tall, to take control of my life. And as I looked at him, I realized that he wasn't here to fix me. He was here to walk beside me, to share the journey. And that was all I needed. The day my ex reached out again, I didn't feel the same pain. His name on the screen didn't make my heart race with anxiety. It didn't fill me with the dread I once had. I had let go of the need for his approval, for his validation. He had moved on with his ex-wife, and I had moved on with my life. I didn't need him to explain himself anymore. I didn't need him to apologize. I had found my peace, and it wasn't with him. It was within me. I realized something. I had spent so much time worrying about what he was doing, about what he was thinking, that I had lost sight of my own worth. I had given him power over me, allowed him to control my happiness. But no more. I had reclaimed that power. My happiness didn't depend on his actions anymore. It was mine to own, mine to protect. And as I sat in the quiet of my apartment, I smiled. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace with myself. Life wasn't perfect. There were still days when I doubted myself, days when the memories would creep back in, but they no longer had the power to destroy me. I had built a new life, a life that was mine and mine alone. I learned to forgive myself for staying in a relationship that didn't serve me, for ignoring the signs, for allowing myself to be treated less than I deserved. But now, I was free. Free to be me. Free to live a life of my choosing. I looked at my new relationship with fresh eyes. It wasn't about filling a void. It was about building something new, something solid. I didn't need him to be happy. I was happy on my own. And I had learned that the most important relationship I could have was with myself. The love I had once sought from him, I now gave to myself. And with that love came healing, came peace. I no longer needed his approval. I no longer needed to prove anything to him or to anyone. One afternoon, I took a trip to the beach. The sun was warm. The waves crashed gently against the shore. As I walked along the sand, I reflected on everything that had happened. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the pain. It all seemed so distant now. The journey had been long and difficult, but I had come out stronger. I had learned to forgive, not for him, but for me. To let go of the bitterness, to release the anger. I wasn't holding on to anything anymore. I was free. I realized that life wasn't about waiting for someone else to make it better. It wasn't about looking for validation from someone who had already betrayed me. It was about taking control of my own narrative. I was the author of my story now, and as I stood on that beach, feeling the wind on my face, I knew that this was just the beginning. I was ready for whatever came next, ready to embrace the future without fear. I was no longer defined by my past. I was defined by the woman I had become. He tried to reach out one last time. He sent me a message asking if we could meet. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. I had nothing to give him anymore. The woman I had been was gone, replaced by someone who knew her worth. Someone who had learned the hard way that love wasn't about sacrifice. It was about mutual respect, trust, and care. And he had taken all of that from me. He didn't deserve another chance. Not in my life, not in my heart. As time went on, I started to focus on what truly mattered. My career, my passions, my friendships, all the things that made me feel alive. I didn't need him to validate me anymore. I didn't need anyone to define who I was. I was enough, just as I was. And as I embraced this new chapter in my life, I realized that the most important thing I had learned was this. I was worthy of love, not just from others, but from myself. Every day became a celebration of the person I had become. I had faced my darkest days and survived. I had fought for my happiness, fought for my peace of mind. And now, I was living a life that was entirely my own. I had learned to trust again, but this time, the trust was for me. I trusted that I was strong enough to handle anything life threw my way. And most importantly, I trusted that I would never allow myself to be anyone's second choice again. As the months went by, I realized that healing wasn't a linear process. There were still moments when the past tried to creep in, when doubts would surface, or when loneliness would settle in. But I had learned to embrace those moments. They didn't define me. I had learned to accept myself, flaws and all. I no longer needed anyone to complete me. I was whole on my own, and that was the most empowering realization of all. I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. I found new joy in the little things, the quiet mornings, the simple pleasures, the freedom to choose my own path. I had become someone I was proud of. And when I looked at the life I had built, I saw strength. I saw resilience. I saw a woman who had been broken, but who had pieced herself back together with her own hands. I didn't need anyone else to make me feel worthy anymore. I had found that worth within myself. One day, as I sat in a cafe with friends, laughing and sharing stories, I realized that I had completely moved on. My past no longer had a hold on me. It was just that, my past. It no longer dictated my future. And for the first time in a long time, I was grateful for everything that had happened. For the pain, for the betrayal. Because without it, I wouldn't have become the person I was now. A woman who knew her value and wouldn't settle for anything less than what she deserved. I had learned to trust love again, but this time, it wasn't about clinging to someone else for validation. It was about trusting that I could love myself enough to make the right choices. I was ready for whatever came next. If love found me again, I would welcome it with open arms. But I knew that my happiness wasn't dependent on anyone else. It was mine to cultivate, mine to protect. I was the author of my story, and it was only getting started. I stood on the balcony one evening, watching the sunset. The sky was painted with hues of orange and pink, and I took a deep breath. Everything that had happened, every tear, every betrayal, every heartbreak, had led me here. And here, in this moment, I was free. I had finally found peace, not in the arms of another, but within myself. And that was more than enough. The woman I had become was strong, whole, and unshakable. And with that, I closed the door on my past and embraced the future with open arms,